Welcome back, everyone, to Wisdom Unveiled. And we're continuing our deep dive into the words of Rumi. And we're looking at Marifat, these conversations with Dr. Dinani and Dr. Larijani. And in particular, I'd love to dive into something that we've talked about before, which is the idea of sorrow. And I think that's something that resonates with everyone. So I think it'll be really helpful for people to hear how Rumi addresses this.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating how Rumi, whose words, echo through the centuries, actually chose the pen name Silence, right? It's sort of a paradox, isn't it? Why would someone whose legacy is built on words choose a name signifying the absence of them?
Yeah, it's a real head scratcher. Why silence? Why not? It's something, a little more showy or, something that kind of captures people's attention.
Right. It's humble, and I
Yeah.
think Dr. Denani suggests that it really points to the limitations of language. That maybe there are these truths that Rumi was trying to give us access to that go beyond words, that are experiential, that can't be
Yeah.
articulated through language.
Yeah, and maybe just as sort of a nod to the fact that so much of this is about experiencing things directly and not just about thinking about them.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it makes me think about how we often try to intellectualize emotions like sorrow, right? When we feel sad, we, try to figure out why we're sad, what's causing it. But Rumi seems to be suggesting that there's a deeper understanding that goes beyond, just the mental realm.
Yeah, well, and speaking of sorrow, both Dr. Dinani and Dr. Larijani talk about how Rumi was really insightful about getting to the root of it. And so one of the things that he pinpoints is, the two main sources of sorrow in the world are desires,
Yeah.
the things that we're chasing after, and the inevitable roadblocks that we encounter in, trying to get those things.
Yeah, and it's so true when you think about it. I mean, all of us have felt that, right? Just that disappointment when things don't go our way, or when we can't seem to, get what we're striving for. It's just a universal part of the human experience.
Yeah, and Dr. Larayani, he goes on to say that sorrow is something that really no one can escape, regardless of your wisdom or your achievements or, how much money you have or whatever it is. It's part of life. It's woven into the very fabric of being human.
Yeah, and so the question then becomes, if it is so, inevitable, if it's just part of who we are, how do we navigate it, right? How do we work with it? How do we transform it?
How do we transcend it?
Yeah, how do we transcend it? And thankfully, Rumi doesn't just leave us hanging, right? He gives us some solutions. He offers a really fascinating idea, which is the idea of detaching from these worldly sorrows in order to reach what he calls the Garden of Permanence, or Baqā.
The Garden of Permanence, Baqā. I love that it sounds so idyllic. What exactly did he envision with this concept?
Yeah, so imagine a realm where there are no imperfections, right? Where desires are met, in an instant, and where obstacles just completely vanish.
Like it's just pure contentment, like wholeness, just like lasting joy.
Yeah, and that's a key point, right? This lasting joy that's so different from the fleeting pleasures and sorrows that we experience, in this physical world.
Yeah, almost sounds like a paradise, right? Like a place beyond, earthly troubles.
And actually, Dr. Larijani draws a parallel to the Quranic concept of Baqā, which means abiding, and is often used to describe the afterlife. So it makes you wonder if Baqā is Rumi's, mystical interpretation of paradise, right? A state of being beyond the limitations of this physical world.
So how do we reach this Baqā? How do we get there? I mean, does he give us any guidance on how to actually escape this cycle of desire and disappointment and find this tranquility, this lasting joy?
Yeah, he does. He does. And I think it really begins with understanding his concept of this hierarchy of existence. So he basically posits God as the ultimate source of everything, followed by the universal intellect and then the soul. And lastly, this physical realm, which we call nature.
Okay, so we have God, intellect, soul, and nature. Those are the players on the field here.
Yeah.
But how do we fit into all of this, and how does it actually relate to overcoming this sorrow?
Yeah, so the key really lies in the soul's position in this hierarchy. So he sees the soul as a kind of bridge between the intellect and the physical world, right? So
Yeah.
we have a choice. We can choose to ascend, towards the divine, or we can choose to get kind of bogged down in these material desires and these attachments that ultimately fuel sorrow.
So we can choose to sort of elevate ourselves through our intellect and our soul, or we can get stuck in this loop of, wanting and suffering. It sounds like a pretty clear choice, but I imagine in practice it's much harder than that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And Rumi doesn't just sort of lay out, the framework for this. He actually gives us some practical steps to guide our ascent. He writes, "Take 2 steps forward from the abode of desires. You'll descend into the sanctuary of majesty."
I love that quote. Take 2 steps forward from the abode of desires, you'll descend into the sanctuary of majesty. So what are those two steps that lead us from this desire to this sanctuary?
Well, the first step involves recognizing that endlessly chasing desires is, never going to lead to lasting satisfaction, right? It's a never-ending cycle. You're always going to want more. You're always going to be striving for something else. And so the second step is really about detaching from those desires through intellectual reflection.
So it's not about, suppressing desire or denying that we have them. It's about understanding their nature and really focusing on finding lasting fulfillment instead of just these fleeting pleasures.
Exactly. And this is where the concept of mua comes in, which Dr. Larijani explains as a state of solace and peace that you achieve through this detachment, right? It's a place where anxiety loses its grip on you.
It's not just escaping sorrow, it's reaching this place of peace. It's so powerful.
Ew. Yeah, and I think Dr. Dinani really stresses the importance of the intellect in this process. He argues that without nurturing our intellect, even if we somehow manage to, reach that realm of desires, all it's going to do is lead to more confusion and ultimately even greater sorrow.
So the intellect is really the key to navigating this world of desire and achieving this true lasting fulfillment, not just the temporary satisfaction of getting what we want.
Exactly. And he actually uses this really great analogy. He compares intellect and will to a powerful engine without a skill driver. So you might have this, amazing, powerful engine, but without someone who knows where they're going, who knows how to handle that power, you could end up just going in circles or, worse, you could crash.
You could end up somewhere you really don't want to be.
Exactly. And he even says, two rational people can debate and reach an agreement, but two clashing wills just lead to conflict. So it's about aligning our will with a higher purpose guided by our intellect and not just brute forcing our way, to happiness.
It's about using that intellect to help us figure out, where we want to go and how to get there and to really discern what's truly going to lead us to that place of fulfillment.
Yeah, and I think to really, highlight the importance of this self-knowledge, this understanding, Rumi poses this question. He says, "The jewel within the ocean of meaning, you can determine its worth if you reflect deeply."
The jewel within the ocean of meaning. I love that. That's so poetic. What is that jewel that he's referring to?
Well, Dr. Larijani points out this really interesting irony, right? He says, we're often experts at assessing the value of material things, right? We know, how much a house is worth or a car, but we completely overlook the worth of our own being.
We spend so much time, trying to figure out, how much things are worth and how much we're worth to other people, and we don't stop and ask ourselves, what am I actually worth?
Yeah, it's a really important question to ask, right? What is the worth of my soul? What truly matters to me? What would I sacrifice for it? And Dr. Larijani connects this to this Quranic concept of haqiqatu, right? This idea that truly knowing yourself, understanding your essence, is at the core of righteousness. It's not just about, intellectual understanding, but it's about living in alignment with your true nature.
And so how do we begin to know ourselves at that level?
Yeah.
How do we actually unearth that jewel that Rumi is talking about?
Well, Rumi offers another really powerful metaphor to guide us on this, and that's the metaphor of the seven-headed dragon.
Ooh, a dragon. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So the seven-headed dragon represents our base desires, so the five senses, harmful imagination, and delusion.
So those seven heads are basically the forces within us that can lead us astray.
Exactly. They represent the paths to what Rumi calls hellish states. So chasing after these fleeting pleasures, getting lost in negativity, indulging in these harmful desires.
Yeah, and it's easy to see how, just getting caught up in those things would lead us away from peace, away from our true nature.
Yeah, and Rumi contrasts this with the 8 gates of paradise, which he says the 8th gate is the intellect. So it's really about using our intellect to shut off those pathways to these, hellish states, and instead, unlock the gates to paradise.
So we're using that intellect to discern what's actually beneficial and what's ultimately going to lead to suffering. And we can use that, that wisdom, that understanding to choose the paths that are going to lead us to fulfillment instead of just more craving and more disappointment.
Exactly. And Dr. Dinani and Dr. Larijani suggest engaging in practices like deep reflection, contemplation, really honing that intellect so that we can see beyond the surface and discern, the true value of things.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in just what appears on the surface and not really look deeply at what's behind it.
And it's interesting, right, how this all kind of circles back to Rumi's pen name, silence. It's not just about being quiet externally, but it's about cultivating that inner stillness that allows our intellect to really flourish.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I think that brings us to another really fascinating element of Rumi's teaching, which is this concept of love. But Well, it's not the love that we usually think of. It's not the romantic love that we see in movies or in stories. It's something much deeper and more profound.
Yeah, it's a more universal kind of love. And Dr. Lorijani describes it so beautifully as this all-encompassing force that binds all of creation together, right? He even compares it to the concept of agape in Greek philosophy, this unconditional love that transcends all boundaries and limitations.
This unconditional love, it sounds so beautiful, but so challenging, especially in a world that, can feel so divided and fractured.
Yeah.
How do we even begin to foster that kind of universal love?
Well, Dr. Dinani suggests that it all starts with ourselves, right? It starts with cultivating self-acceptance and self-compassion.
Because, they say you can't pour from an empty cup, right? If we're constantly judging and criticizing ourselves, how can we possibly offer, genuine love and acceptance to other people?
That's a great point. And Dr. Larijani also adds that self-love isn't just about, feeling good about ourselves. It's also about recognizing our inherent worth as individuals and, taking responsibility for our own well-being.
So it's really about nurturing our own physical, emotional, and spiritual health, right? Creating that solid foundation of love and respect within ourselves.
Yeah, and Dr. Dinani really believes that as we cultivate this genuine self-love, it naturally radiates outwards, right? It extends to others and ultimately to all beings.
It's a ripple effect, right? It starts with us, and then it goes out and it touches and transforms everything around us.
Yeah, and this actually makes me think of another point that Dr. Larijani makes, which is that Rumi wasn't just this, poet lost in contemplation. He was also, a scholar, a jurist, a teacher. He was deeply engaged in the world around him.
He wasn't just about, personal transformation. He was really about making a tangible difference in the lives of other people.
Yeah, he walked the walk, right? He didn't just talk the talk. And Dr. Dinani suggests that contemplation without action is actually incomplete. He says we need to embody that divine love in our deeds, in our choices, in the way we treat others.
So it's not just about thinking about these concepts, but it's really about living them right.
Yeah.
About putting them into practice in our lives.
Exactly. And actually, Dr. Larijani shares a really great story that highlights Rumi's constant thirst for knowledge. Right? So despite all of his wisdom, he was always seeking new perspectives, new insights.
There was always more to learn. It's a great reminder, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, and Dr. Dinani actually emphasizes this willingness to learn as a really crucial aspect of, cultivating marifat. It's about letting go of the need to be right and embracing that humility of a beginner's mind.
The beginner's mind. I love that concept. It's such a powerful idea, approaching every experience with fresh eyes, with a sense of wonder and curiosity, rather than getting bogged down by all of our preconceived notions.
Yeah, and to illustrate this point, Dr. Larijani shares a story about a scholar who came to Rumi, seeking knowledge, and before sharing any wisdom, Rumi asked the scholar to empty his cup.
To empty his cup. I love that. What was Rumi getting at?
Well, it's a really powerful metaphor, right? It's about letting go of those preconceived notions and creating that space for new understanding. Only when the cup is empty can it be filled with fresh knowledge.
So it's about approaching learning with that humility and an open mind, like a beginner ready to absorb new ideas without the baggage of all of our old, limiting beliefs.
Exactly. And Dr. Dinani stresses that this emptying of the cup is essential for genuine growth, right? It's about constantly questioning our assumptions, challenging our own beliefs, and really, expanding our understanding of the world.
It's so easy to get trapped in our own limited perspective, clinging to those beliefs that no longer serve us.
And this story really reminds us to be open to new possibilities, to keep learning and evolving throughout our lives.
I think that's a great place to maybe pause for now, and we can pick up in our next deep dive with some more of Rumi's insights.
Sounds great to me.
I'm really looking forward to it. I always learn so much in these conversations.
Me too. Rumi is a well that never runs dry.
He's an endless source of wisdom and inspiration. So for everyone listening, we'll see you next time for more Wisdom Unveiled.
It's so interesting how Rumi's wisdom, really resonates across cultures and centuries. It's like he tapped into something very universal.
Yeah, a truth about the human experience that really transcends, time and place.
And, speaking of making these teachings relevant to our lives, Dr. Dinani stresses the importance of finding a balance between contemplation and action. He says, simply reflecting on divine concepts isn't enough.
Right. It's about embodying those concepts in our daily lives, actually, living those insights, putting them into action.
Yeah, so our choices should reflect this deeper understanding of these truths.
It's not enough to, just Think about love and compassion. You have to actually practice them in your interactions with the world.
Right. And he actually highlights this story about Rumi encountering a scholar who came to him seeking knowledge, and before sharing any wisdom, Rumi asked the scholar to empty his cup.
Empty his cup. I'm so curious where this is going.
Yeah, it's a powerful metaphor for letting go of preconceived notions, and creating that space for a new understanding.
So approaching learning with a sense of humility and open mind, like a beginner willing to absorb new knowledge without, being limited by old beliefs.
Exactly. And Dr. Dhanani emphasizes that this, emptying of the cup is essential for genuine growth. It's about constantly questioning our assumptions, challenging our own beliefs, and expanding our understanding of the world.
It's a good reminder that it's easy to get trapped in our own limited perspectives.
Yeah.
We cling to certain beliefs and we think we have it all figured out.
And this story encourages us to, be open to new possibilities, to keep learning and evolving throughout our lives.
It's a lifelong journey.
It is. And, speaking of journeys, Dr. Larijani reminds us that Rumi wasn't just, a mystic lost in contemplation. He was actually deeply engaged with the world around him. He worked to alleviate suffering. He promoted justice.
Yeah, it really challenges that image of Rumi as just a poet, sitting in a room writing.
Yeah, he lived his principles.
Yeah.
He was a scholar, a jurist, a teacher.
You walk the walk.
He did. And Dr. Dhanani suggests that, contemplation without action is incomplete. We need to embody that divine love in our deeds and our choices and the way we treat others.
We have to take those ideas, those beautiful ideas, and put them into practice.
Yeah.
Make a real difference in the world around us.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the theme of silence. But this time, focusing on its role in personal growth. Dr. Dhanani describes silence as the fertile ground from which wisdom can sprout.
It's not just the absence of noise. It's a fertile space where something new can emerge.
Exactly. And it's about, cultivating that inner stillness that allows, deeper insights to emerge, those whispers of wisdom that are so often drowned out by the noise of, everyday life.
It's so true. I think we all long for that inner peace, that sense of connection to something greater than ourselves.
But finding that true silence in our modern world, can be a challenge.
It feels almost impossible at times.
It can be, but Dr. Dhanani suggests that it's not just about finding, a quiet place. It's about cultivating a state of inner stillness. It's a practice, being present with ourselves without judgment, without distraction.
It's about training our attention, quieting those mental chatterboxes that are constantly going in our minds.
Exactly. And Dr. Larijani highlights another concept that I think relates to this. He talks about the power of wonder and awe.
Wonder and awe. Those sound like qualities we usually associate with children.
They are, and that's exactly Dr. Dhanani's point. He says, wonder and awe are antidotes to cynicism and despair. They remind us of life's beauty and possibilities.
As we get older, we tend to lose that childlike sense of amazement. We get so bogged down by our routines and responsibilities.
And Dr. Larijani adds that, wonder and awe allow us to approach life with a sense of curiosity, appreciate the mystery and the majesty of creation.
It's about seeing the world with fresh eyes, noticing the extraordinary in the ordinary.
Yeah, finding that spark of delight, that makes life feel so vibrant.
That makes you feel alive.
Yeah. And to illustrate this point, Dr. Larijani shares this charming anecdote about Rumi interacting with a group of children playing hide and seek.
Oh, I love Rumi's stories. He always has such a playful way of imparting wisdom.
Yeah, so Rumi approached these children and he asked them what they were doing, and they said, "We're playing hide and seek."
Okay, I can already sense some wisdom coming.
And Rumi simply smiled and said, "No, you are playing find."
Playing find, what a subtle but profound shift in perspective.
It is. And Dr. Dhanani explains that, Rumi was hinting at this deeper truth. The divine isn't hidden from us, we're hiding from it.
We're the ones who are lost.
Yeah, it's not about searching for something outside of ourselves, but about uncovering that divine presence that already exists within us.
It's about remembering who we truly are.
Exactly. And Dr. Larijani adds that this process of, playing find is a lifelong journey. It's about peeling back those layers, of conditioning, the beliefs, the fears, the doubts that obscure our true nature, that divine spark within us.
It's a good reminder that, we're not defined by our limitations. We're defined by that potential for growth and transformation that's always there.
And Dr. Dhanani suggests that, certain practices can help us along this journey of uncovering our true selves. Meditation, prayer, chanting, spending time in nature, acts of kindness, compassion.
It's about finding what resonates with us. What helps us connect with that source of peace and love and wisdom.
But as we discussed earlier, This journey isn't always easy. We stumble. We get caught up in fear and doubt and attachments.
And that brings us to another crucial aspect of Rumi's teachings, which is this idea of letting go.
Letting go of attachments.
It sounds so simple, but it's probably one of the most challenging aspects of, personal growth.
Yeah. And so what kind of attachments are we talking about here?
Anything we cling to, for a sense of identity or security.
Yeah, so it could be material possessions, ideas of who we are, our roles in society, even our beliefs and opinions.
It's about recognizing that our true nature goes beyond those labels, those external things that we cling to.
Exactly. And Dr. Dinani reminds us that, letting go isn't about denying ourselves pleasure or living a life of deprivation. It's about recognizing the impermanence of all things and, choosing to focus on what truly matters. And he uses this beautiful analogy of the lotus flower.
The lotus flower, how does that relate to letting go?
Well, the lotus is rooted in the mud, right? But it rises above it, and its beauty is unstained by its surroundings. And in the same way, we can be in the world, enjoying its pleasures and experiences, but without being attached to them.
So we can appreciate those things, we can enjoy them, but we don't let them define us.
Exactly. We can appreciate the impermanence of these experiences and choose to cultivate, the beauty and the purity of our inner being.
It's a powerful image.
It is.
And it reminds us that, we are not defined by our circumstances or possessions, that our true essence is something much greater.
Yeah, and that brings us back to the importance of putting these teachings into practice, in our daily lives. It's not enough to just read about them or listen to podcasts about them.
We have to actually embody them, let them inform our thoughts, our words, our actions.
Right. It's about making conscious choices that align with Rumi's wisdom. Choosing love over fear, generosity, over greed, connection, over isolation.
Letting Rumi's teachings be our guide as we navigate this complex world.
And it's an ongoing process, right? We're going to stumble, we're going to fall back into old patterns. But the key is to keep practicing, keep learning, keep growing.
Keep returning to Rumi's words for inspiration and guidance.
And as Dr. Laurijani reminds us, this is just one piece of a much larger tapestry. There are many more threads to weave together.
So much more to explore.
Exactly. And I'm excited to continue this journey with you.
Me too. I always learn so much from these conversations.
And so do I. Rumi's wisdom is a well that never runs dry.
He is an endless source of inspiration and guidance. So to everyone listening out there, we'll see you next time for more Wisdom Unveiled.
It's so fascinating how those themes kind of intertwine, right? Like the silence, the wonder, the letting go. It's like they're all different facets of the same jewel, illuminating different aspects of truth.
Yeah, I love that analogy. They do feel very interconnected, like different paths that all converge, on that same destination, that place of inner peace and connection that Rumi talks about.
Exactly. And Dr. Johnny points out something really interesting about Rumi's concept of love. He says it goes beyond, that romantic love that we often encounter in stories and pop culture.
So not just about, finding a soulmate or experiencing, these passionate emotions. What kind of love is he talking about?
Well, Dr. Laurijani describes it as a more universal kind of love, a cosmic principle that binds all of creation. He compares it to the idea of agape in Greek philosophy, this unconditional love that transcends all boundaries.
It's that unconditional love embracing everything and everyone. It's so beautiful, but also sounds incredibly challenging to cultivate in a world that can feel so divided.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin to foster that kind of universal love?
Dr. Danny suggests that it all starts with ourselves, with cultivating self-love, self-acceptance, and self-compassion.
You can't pour from an empty cup if we're constantly judging and criticizing ourselves.
Yeah.
How can we possibly offer genuine love and acceptance to others?
That's a great point. And Dr. Laurijani also adds that, self-love isn't just about feeling good about ourselves, but it's about recognizing our inherent worth as individuals and taking responsibility for our well-being.
So nurturing our physical, emotional, and spiritual health, creating that solid foundation of, love and respect within ourselves.
Exactly. And Dr. Dinani believes that as we cultivate this genuine self-love, that it naturally kind of radiates outwards and extends to others and ultimately to all beings.
That ripple effect, it starts with us.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of goes out and touches and transforms everything around us.
Yeah. And that actually reminds me of Dr. Laurijani's point about Rumi's very active life. He wasn't just this poet lost in thought. He was a scholar. He was a jurist. He was a teacher. He was deeply engaged in the world.
Yeah, he really embodied those principles, putting those ideas of love and compassion into action, making a difference in people's lives.
Yeah, he walked the walk. He didn't just talk the talk.
And Dr. Dinani suggests that Contemplation without action is incomplete. We need to embody that love in our deeds and our choices, in the way we treat others.
Absolutely. It's about translating those teachings from the page into the world.
Yeah, letting them inspire us to be more loving, more compassionate, and more just in every aspect of our lives.
As we come to the end of our deep dive into Rumi's world, I'm struck by the timelessness of his wisdom.
Me too. It's incredible how, teachings from centuries ago can still be so powerful and so relevant, in our modern world.
Yeah, it's like he tapped into something so universal.
Definitely. And as we continue on our own journeys, of self-discovery and spiritual growth, I hope we can all find, some inspiration and guidance in his words.
May his teachings remind us to cultivate silence, embrace wonder, let go of attachments, and, approach life with love and compassion.
And may we all remember to play, find, uncovering that divine spark that's within each of us.
Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of Rumi's world. We hope you found it enriching and inspiring.
And until next time, may you find peace, love, and wonder in every moment.